thoughts on that aspect, but otherwise your submission is very clear and I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Bonus, did you have any reflections on that following yesterday that you can sort of update the submitter, or is it still work in progress?
I think the only thing I can, I was asked a question yesterday about the status, that is in my evidence, and I agree entirely with what the submitters are providing. So I listened to the evidence of Mr. Hull and today, and I guess just want to make sure that the panel and all parties are aware of my recommendation to remove the FDA.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Right. Our next submitter is Warren and Liz Scott. Dolan, are you leading the case today? Or?
Madam Chair, I'll just do a brief introduction and then hand it over to the experts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and panel, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Glenn McLaughlin, Director of Davis Ogilvy Ariki, multidisciplinary land development company in Timaru. I've worked across land development and infrastructure planning for over 2 decades in New Zealand and internationally. I grew up in Timaru and have lived back here for approximately 18 years now, so I am familiar with the district, including the context of this site. Today I appear on behalf of Warren and Liz Scott, who are present but didn't wish to speak. They are the owners of 22 Templar Street. Scott's are long-standing Geraldine residents with family links to the area going back over 115 years. They continue to be actively involved in various community beautification and planting initiatives throughout the Geraldine district. They also, as a bit of context, they owned the land adjacent to the subject site, which is now the retirement village. And even back then, there was consideration of where town could logically extend, which is evidenced by an infrastructure corridor on that site. The nature of my involvement, I'm not presenting expert evidence in planning or engineering. I'm here more as a strategic advisor and in support for the landowners. My role is to provide support and strategic input into the overall direction of the submission based on my experience within the land development infrastructure industry, along with the decades of local knowledge I have. Where possible, I'll try and assist in responding to questions about the submitter's intentions and capability and reinforce practical development-led perspective on how this land can contribute to the district's future growth. You'll hear from Sonia Dolan to my left as our lead planner, and Selwyn Chang, infrastructure engineer, who have provided evidence and will address technical matters where necessary and will be available to answer questions the panel may have. For a bit of context, Sonia has only just recently joined us as our principal planner, starting in early June. She's still working remotely from Wellington until she moves down later this year, so she's had to come up to speed quickly with the information and matters associated with the growth chapter and the submitter's sites and hearing G preparation. I also consider it relevant to point out that Selwyn Chang's evidence and presence offers an experienced and balanced view given his experience in both local authority and private practice. In particular, his detailed understanding of the likes of asset and infrastructure management, LTP funding and financial contributions within the local government environment. Our goal is to work openly and constructively with the panel and the experts and council to progress what we believe is a well-considered and appropriate residential development opportunity. Before I hand over to the team, just a few key points I'd like to get across. The land is already earmarked for growth. Let's not stall it. Council has already identified the site as FDA, a priority future development area with a 5-year depth horizon. It was identified in the GMS 2022 review as live zoning for urban development. Mr. Bonus confirms the site is exempt from the NPS HPL due to the GMS designation. We've taken this seriously. Our team has prepared a concept plan, undertaken servicing assessments and assessed hazards and cultural feedback. We disagree that there's no urgency. From experience, I'd simply say that zone land is not available land, while the property economics land capacity assessment suggests sufficient zone capacity in the district. We've long argued that zoning doesn't equal delivery. We're not saying that the property economics model should be ignored, but its outputs should be pressure tested, peer reviewed and contextualised in the lived realities of each growth area and township. Given the importance and heavy reliance on this assessment, we consider this as a district-wide matter beyond the burden of an individual submitter to carry out. District plans and reviews are extremely costly and time-consuming. I believe we're sitting at around 8 years since the initial draft GMS for the district was debated at a hearing in late 2017. To ensure our district can react to changing market demands, we need a district plan which can enable and respond to growth with suitable guardrails. And I'll just touch on in regards to the property economics and that look out for a horizon. Infrastructure, and Selwyn will speak to this, is often designed for 100 years. And the current national guidance, which just came out last month, is indicating that council should be looking at least 50 years in terms of what growth looks like. So planning is where it's starting. We're ready to work with council. Let's use the right tool. We support the FDA overlay in principle, also the principle that the site has been appropriately identified as being suitable for development. But waiting for a debt and rezoning leaves development stranded. That's why we seek rezoning, or at a minimum, the future urban zone as a preferred outcome. Sonia will speak to this, but the future urban zone is recognised by the planning standards, New Zealand, the national planning standards. It's already used by other Tier 3 councils such as New Plymouth, Waitomo, Wairarapa. It offers council the oversight it needs while enabling progress via structured planning. Mr. Bonner points out both FDA and FUZ follow a two-step structure plan and plan change approach. But as I understand it, the key difference between the two is that the FUZ creates greater certainty, transparency and readiness, whereas the FDA sequencing acts like a gate that can't be unlocked until council decides the time is right, with zoning still being a hurdle. On infrastructure, we're not asking council to pay now. We're well aware of the infrastructure challenges and sequencing responsibilities, but deferring zoning until infrastructure is fully programmed is at odds with the flexibility offered by an FUZ. And most importantly, as I alluded to before, the recent government policy direction issued last month, going for housing growth paper, cautions against delaying zoning based on rigid funding horizons. The site is low risk, readily serviceable, and can be brought forward if paired with smart infrastructure planning. To summarise, this plan has been signalled for residential growth since at least 2022. We've listened to the Section 42A officer and responded with the homework. We're not asking for leapfrogging, just progress. If full rezoning to general residential zone isn't supported now, we strongly believe a FUZ is more responsive, transparent and future-ready option. Failing that, we asked for a reduction in the FDA 3 timeframe to reflect the site's readiness. We're certainly open to post-hearing caucusing with experts if necessary. We believe in collaboration and are ready to resolve any residual concerns through structured and dialogue. We'll now hand over to Sonia and Selwyn to speak to the area evidence.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Just before you do, and just in terms of efficiency, you've got a team that are going to be presenting across a range of submissions. So the panel will have questions relative to each submitter that you represent. But before we do that, can we just, I would just like to ask some questions of yourself and Ms. Dolan, just to set the scene so that we're not asking the same questions for each presentation, if that's okay. And thank you for your explanation of how you've approached it and your concerns around the economics, but you've essentially said the things that are in Ms. Dolan's evidence about the veracity of the economic assessment and you just made a plea for caucusing. So I'm just going to ask some questions about, firstly, I take your point that it's a district-wide issue in terms of the economic evaluation, and that but legally there is still a burden on a submitter to come with their best case to persuade us, and there are some responsibilities and obligations that I'll talk to Ms. Dolan about in terms of the requirements of the RMA. But Ms. Dolan's offered a critique of Mr. Heath's evidence, and I'm not clear from reading any of your statements of evidence what your qualifications and experience are that enable you to offer not just a critique. I accept that you're most able to read an economic report and point out what you might see are gaps or holes, but what qualifications do you have to effectively plug the gaps with an alternative economic approach?
Madam Chair, can I answer that? So my experience in planning has been more in the strategic planning space. In my previous role that I was in, worked at Ministry of Education, and we had to do a lot of analysis as far as the population growth and demand capacity for new schools. So as far as the experience I have, there was a lot of that statistical data analysis and a lot of reports that had to go into that. So primarily from that experience, I'm using that as a kind of basis for, I mean, as Mr. Glockman, pointed out, we're not here to, we understand we have to have expert evidence and inputs as far as the economic analysis. But what he's put together is very similar to what we have at the Ministry of Education, and I'm using that as the basis, just, on the high population growth and that sort of thing, we take it as well. So that's, I understand where you're coming from, but that is something that I have been well versed with my previous role.
And in that role, were you generally receiving specialist expert economic report or statistical advice, or are you doing the primary research and evaluation?
So it's a combination. We do actually quite a lot of in-house work ourselves. In fact, we don't actually have a lot of consultants do the work, so that is done primarily in-house. And something that I've garnered in the last sort of 2.5 years that I was there.
When you say we, you personally, or did you have a team with other economists within your team?
So myself, and then it got peer reviewed by other people in similar roles. So basically we did what you call network demand planning, and using a lot of the data that's sourced from the NZ stats.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's helpful. The other question is that across the submitters, through the process that we set up for the growth hearings, there was an opportunity for submitters to present a package of information to address some key issues that Mr. Bonas had identified in a preliminary Section 42A report. Were you the author of or had any input into that information that was provided by each submitter?
You're talking about the information sent, I think, back in February. No, I was not at that time.
Have you read that information, and are you in a position to adopt particularly the planning responses as part of your evidence to us today? And can we ask you questions on those, or you disagree with them?
I take it's appendix. Obviously, it's part of the evidence, and I understand that it's something that was material considerations under the RMA. I've come in with, I guess, a bit of a fresh set of eyes, and I believe that the pathway that I've chosen with this with my evidence here best serves sort of the growth management within the district. So, Yeah.
One of the issues that we have identified in terms of the briefs of evidence that you provided is that there's no Section 32 AA analysis for the alternatives that you are offering, particularly the FUS, but even the primary submission or the options that the submitter is seeking. I just wonder why you haven't done that.
I understand that completely, and I think it's just been time constraints. Came into this role quite late on, and it's just primarily the resourcing issue with that, but totally take that noted and understand where you're coming from with that.
And you're not alone. We've had other planners who come to us and have effectively just been providing rebuttal, which is not, in our view, the role and the context of this hearing, that we do require and are assisted by your opinion on the required statutory tests. And we've enabled an opportunity for those planners to go away and review the material that's in front of them and produce a Section 32 AA to assist the panel. Are you willing to do that if we provide that time?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Cindy.
Sorry, my other general question around the economic evidence was whether or not you had the opportunity to listen into Mr. Heath's presentation and responses to your evidence, and whether you're in a position to respond to those to us today.
I did listen to the live stream, Madam Chair, yesterday. Yeah, he spoke to, correct. And so I can do my best to answer any questions you have there.
Well, rather than us parroting back to you, Mr. Heath directed some specific responses to your evidence. Have you provided a response to those points, or do we need to walk you through his conclusions?
Yeah, sure. No, I did listen and there were some things, there were some like key rebuttal points that he had to make. And so I have got something that I can speak to if you need to. Yeah.
Would your preference be to do that for each submitter, or do you want to provide a general response?
Probably a general response perhaps at the end. Wrapping that all up. I'm just trying to think what would be the best place.
Yeah, I think it would actually at the outset, because otherwise we're going to ask questions that are not necessary. If you've got a response to the concerns, particularly you made some comments around the modelling, and he made some corrections in his evidence around the average lot size versus the minimum lot size, and what he described as a real world approach. And I think the panel would be assisted if you could address us now on your responses so that we don't ask unnecessary questions.
Madam Chair, would you like me to do that now? Yeah. So with Mr. Heath had spoken forward, he talked about how the population projections for NZ stats is based on a high growth scenario, 20 plus years, and post-COVID we had growth in a number of areas. He talked about also with that particular year we did have a bit of a spike in the Timaru district, 1.1%. He actually said that that's across a lot of districts in the country, but what I've actually done is I've had a quick look at some other areas similar to Timaru district, and in actual fact a lot of places actually witnessed decline. So the modelling that has NZ Stats had provided for post-COVID, it means that for Timaru district we actually have experienced higher growth than what's predicted under NZ Stats. The other thing he spoke to also was we in our statement, or in the statement, talked about the primary industry and farming sector, and he said that there's no correlation between growth in primary production for farms per se to that of uptake of population growth or for increased housing needs in Timaru specifically. However, I'd like to say that it's the whole thing with the primary industry is that it's an economy as a whole. It contributes to trickle-down effects for agriculture-based industries. As we know in Timaru, there is a huge manufacturing area with agri technology, local food manufacturing, and that's all contributed to the primary industry being, horticultural, agricultural, and if anything, if the growth has happened within the township, that's meant that the employment has obviously been stronger. Primary industry obviously contributes to that. And if you have people coming to the district, then obviously that also gives an uptake of the housing need, and so on and so on. The other thing that Mr. Heath also lettered to us was, and it's great that he clarified that about the 450 square metres. He said that it wasn't just an average. He said that it was they did a economic modelling analysis where 450 was an average. But he actually did state that the key drivers market force for Timaru would be on the older demographic cohort needing smaller homes and downsizing. Therefore, they need the 450 square metre allotment size, potential townhouse, what have you. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you've got various cohorts in the Timaru district. I've worked out that only 23% of the district is over the age of 65, so that's well within the minority. You have obviously a number of families that move to the area because the unemployment rate's actually one of the lowest in the country, so there's plenty of employment opportunities. But it doesn't, what he spoke to as far as the pent-up market demand doesn't speak for the other cohorts and what the key drivers are as far as giving us that 450 square metres. As I said in my evidence later on, the quality report speaks to a average, which is anything between sort of 700 to 1,000 square metres as the average size for allotment. The other thing he did say was he spoke to the what they use as for the data from the NZSAT, high growth population. They use the high population predictions, also use medium, but even with the high, they say that we've got sufficient amount of residential zone land with the FDAs. That's just an added bonus with the high population growth. They've also got a buffer on top of that, which is 20%. And they said therefore that the demand for Timaru is not needed. However, it is being given that other tier 3 councils in the district in the country. Good examples, Waikamu District Council. Tier 3 council also very similar as far as primary industries, also got a lot of HPL land there, but their population is actually smaller now than it was 20 years ago. However, they have actually gone into allocate a whole lot of fast growth areas within the district. And that's also not with the infrastructure confirmed there, but they are just predicting, growth over long term. It's not necessarily looking at a 10-year life cycle as the district plan implies. It's looking at anything kind of as far as 20 years plus, which is, what a lot of these other councils, Tier 3 councils have done for the growth, providing for growth in their upcoming district plan review. What's the other thing that I had here? I think that's it. Thank you. That's the summary of what I've got there.
Just picking up on that point, in terms of examples in other tier 3 councils, do you or have you made any investigation as to what sort of status of the infrastructure is in those districts and the relative efficiencies of zoning additional land relative to the existing infrastructure and planned growth of infrastructure?
So good examples at Waitomo District Council, if they had the information as far as the infrastructure provided with why is it going out for these fuzz areas. They actually said that the infrastructure hasn't been provided for or investigated, but these assessments will be done at a later date. I think for them it's just about future proofing the district for the medium to long term. And yeah, so as far as I'm aware, the way that the mechanism going forward, that those things can be factored in for much later. And I'm talking about areas that actually are growth areas that are outside the urban settlements. They, all the sites that we have that were put forward are all on the urban fringe, so all on the sort of within the settlements boundary, so to speak. So I think that's something else that also supports our case, compared to some other councils that have gone a bit further out from their settlement areas.
Thank you. And my last general question was, you've made recommendations to us around post-hearing conferencing. And I'm just a little bit puzzled about that, given what do you anticipate that process being? I presume you're talking about expert witness conferencing.
Correct, yeah. So I guess from where we look at it is that this timeline from here on to when you have decision making, if there's anything that, for example, now that you've actually talked about Section 32, a report having to, Section 32 report having to, obviously something go away and come back with. But there's anything else that would add clout to the evidence before us and going forward, anything bringing on the process for a change or obviously it's something for yourself and the panel to decide on. We take it with the buzz, but there's a really interesting time right now with the RM reform, and I think there's a lot going on in the background with Ministry of Environment and what that will bring to the table. I think that's what we're talking about, speaking for that kind of change where the housing may have to be up to a 50-year period. So it may have to look at perhaps making some changes here. And that's what we're coming from.
Just want to be clear. I mean, my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that conferencing between experts is generally about experts exercising their within the bounds of their code of conduct, meeting and resolving technical issues between themselves, which may or may not be the outcome which your client is seeking, which is quite different from you having an opportunity offline to negotiate or say the council more generally that your proposal has merit. What do you mean by conferencing?
So as far as I'm aware, it's about, like you said before, bringing in those experts and working together to see whether or not there's any way that we can take this pathway further. It might be that we actually get to a point where that's not where, the drivers and working with the council, it might be that we come to a point where things won't go any further. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's just more, it's more that it's an interesting space right now where things are going with the reform and all that sort of thing. So yeah.
You'll appreciate, however, that we have a job to do within the law as it stands today, and what may or may not occur as a consequence of future reform is not really something that we can take into account in terms of our processes. We have a statutory timeline, or the council has a statutory timeline which it has to deliver, notify this plan, and it's one that this panel is working towards. So I just want to highlight that a suggestion that we should be persuaded or worried or concerned about what powers the government may or may not have in the future is not something that we can take into account in this process.
And I understand that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a question too, just about you mentioned about the fuzz and whether or not that might be progressed through some form of conferencing. At the moment, we don't have any detail of what that might look like. And I just wondered whether you had given any thought to the procedural difficulties that puts us in and other participants in this hearing if you were to effectively go away and create a zone that doesn't currently exist and what the wider implications are for that in terms of procedural matters.
And I understand would be, Madam Chair, under time constraints for a decision. So it might be something that we might have to consider perhaps post that. And I understand where you're coming from. I guess from here on, it's just something that having looked at where we've come this far, and I understand I've come in quite late in the process. It's just
Appreciate that too.
Yeah. It's just some, as I said before, it's something that councils have endorsed and adopted throughout the country. I just think that there's a bit better pathway, as obviously was recommended at the beginning, and that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Just got one, oh, sorry, I've got one kind of more generic planning question that'll cover them all. I'd just like to get, and I guess it's knowing you were coming in late probably has helped assist perhaps the direction your evidence has gone more in rebuttal. So I just want to get your understanding of the key statutory drivers in relation, because there's been a lot of focus in your evidence on capacity. So I want to just clearly understand where you see the key statutory drivers for capacity being such a large issue, comparative to say some of the other things like form of development. So it's quite a general question, but it's just because I think you haven't done that kind of detailed statutory evaluation. I'd just like to get your views to at a very high level about where you see the key drivers, and particularly I would like to know specifically if you've considered provisions in the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement.
Thanks, Joan. Appreciate it. And you're right. And some of that has already been provided for the last lot of evidence. So what I'm trying to do is I take the evidence as part of this evidence, right? And it's just more providing another layer. So the way I look at it is that having come from a strategic planning lens and having that experience has really done what, it's a really good thing to come as a planner to look at this, because quite often planners are really good at statutory, and don't get me wrong, I totally understand, where that on experience. So I know that the Canterbury Regional Plan, you've also got the NP's HPL, and I totally understand that you have to give effect to that. But where I'm coming from is, okay, so it's the capacity part of it. That's all sort of providing input to something that actually this is going to have a lifespan of at least 10 years. So we want to make sure that we get that right. So that's where I'm coming from on that angle. The statutory considerations, I understand that. So for me, it's as far as the sites and where they're placed. I don't believe that, it goes against any of the material considerations in the Canterbury Policy Statement. I know that HPL is a bit of a something that we have to overcome, and I haven't had time to obviously do the sort of the matters of you've got the ABC, and you've got the other thing about the social considerations, the environmental considerations, the economic considerations. So I haven't brought that to the party, but I do believe that we can work through those things. The way I look at it also is that a lot of these sites, general rural zone, they they can, as a right, apply for resource consent, right? And a lot of the activity status within the district would be discretionary. So there's some things that can be done. It's just what I'm trying to get is that a lot of this land can have something done to it. And I just believe that the HPL, not necessarily is a complete stumbling block for a lot of these sites. I think these things can be worked through. It's all about imbalance, with the statutory considerations, but also I think the NPSUD makes it quite clear about what the councils have to provide for as far as housing growth and future-proofing Timaru district going forward. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to kind of, as for another layer to what's already been provided for back in February, excuse me.
I didn't have any general questions, but I do have just one follow-up now.
Yeah, it's all good.
And that was, have you had the opportunity to see the summary statement from Mr. Bonas, where he talks about there may be potentially an unintended consequence of applying the future urban zone, given the MPS HPL, and it might be urban. Have you looked at that and thought about that?
And it's something that I would love to have more time for the HPL considerations. We have, as a team, come together and spoken about this a lot. Where out of all the things on merits, that's the one thing we think, okay, how we had the chance to be able to do a thorough assessment, we would have, but at this point in time, it's I just feel like something like that we have to have the opportunity to bring more evidence. That would be great. A little bit like Cindy's given an opportunity for Section 32 report, then if something else can be brought into this, that'd be great. But otherwise, yes, I totally understand where you're coming from, Megan. It's something that we do understand, and there has been some sites that we've got where we have had a little bit like North Meadows, we've had land use consent granted on land that has got HPL considerations, and obviously there's another change that's happening with the government bringing that in as well. But yeah, thank you. There's a voice.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your candid responses in terms of your involvement. It has helped clarify for us the context of your brief. Look, what we do now is we'll revert to your particular submitters, and so we're back with the Scots. So if other than the things that we've discussed now, which apply across the board, if there are specific matters to the Scots that you wish to draw our attention to in terms of a planning context, I invite you to do that now, and then the panel will ask you questions about those matters.
And then just want to clarify, so you want me to just take a lot of what I've got as evidence as read and just,
Absolutely,
yeah.
all expert evidence
Right.
is taken as read, and we've canvassed those front end matters which are generic across.
Yeah.
So we're on to the specifics. So just give us a quick summary of what your opinions are and whether or not they have changed as a consequence of anything you've heard from council yesterday.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Excuse me, my voice. So having bearing in mind what we've just had with the questions, with the property economics report and modelling, we on the view that with the property economics report hasn't been peer reviewed to analyse the data and confirm assumptions made. We've also spoken about the what Mr. Heath had to say yesterday. He said that he had assumptions made on the high growth area, but I noticed that Mr. Bonas actually referred to the medium growth scenario set out in the Stats NZ modelling predictions. So it would be good to get clarification of actually what the predictions are going forward, as far as how a lot of this capacity demand has actually been put forward. We've also talked about the population predictions, saying that they were going to be a bit lower and how they've actually ended up being higher as a consequence of the year 2020 onwards. The other thing I wanted to talk about is table 13, which is on just below my statement 19, talks about the high population scenario based on the yield of 450 square metres lot sizes. So he talked about that, but actually it's average. And he said that across the existing district plan zoning. But one thing that we also want to know is going forward, what were the FDA's modelling? Was that done with the average of 450, or was that done with a whole range of different yield? That's something that also haven't had that addressed from Mr. Heath.
I think, didn't we discuss earlier, Mr. Heath did specifically address that and correct his evidence that the 450 was the minimum and that he had applied, effectively it took into account, the modelling took into account sort of the real world outcomes, and he gave us the averages for each of the settlements in his evidence.
Correct, but how about the actual FDA areas, were they also included in that? Because as far as I understanding, was under the existing settlements based on the info and the calculation from there. I wasn't quite clear about the FDA's and how he's done the calculation for that. So the other thing was talking about that Collier's residential property market study. They noted that the average land area of the vacant section in Timaru district is 1,033 square metres. And one with a house or dwelling on it would be 784 square metres. Going on to Section 20, so in Geraldine itself, we understand that in that table, it's unlike some of the others in our submission we've got here, that without the FDA, there would be sufficient residential capacity of the land available. The other thing too about Geraldine is that there are a lot of land holdings of people that live on that wouldn't necessarily want to subdivide their properties and carve it up for land development. I think that's been factored into this table. So it's sort of a unique settlement circumstances compared to other settlements in the district. The other thing we wanted to say here is that as a Tier 3 council, Timaru is not bound by the 15 households per hectare minimum. That this would apply to the greater Christchurch. And the use of the 15 household per hectare high consumption capacity modelling through Timaru overstates slightly delivery potential and fails to reflect the character, market conditions and infrastructure limitations of the district. The next page. Take the rest as read, and then I go into the National Policy Statement for Urban Development and the government's temporary powers. Take that as read as well, where the changes are happening in the government and the applications of Tier 3 councils. The next section to do with the recommendation of planning tool for future urban areas. Talking about speaking to the FUS as a zoning pathway, and I think that's been spoken for quite a bit already, and I've heard that from some of the evidence yesterday and questions asked by the panel. To pick that as read as well. The other thing too is that the future urban zone can be subject to a structure plan that would also incorporate future further technical investigations. And I understand a lot of other councils have been taking that as a pathway. No, like other councils, the infrastructure costings are dealt through with the LTP process and all privately funded with agreements in place between the developer and the council. Good example of Forest City Council has how they've allocated the funds, framework as part of their proposed district plan, and then a variation to the district plan was then enabled to live zone the buzz, was consequently endorsed 18 months post the future urban zone framework being in place. The reason why overall we recommend the buzz be introduced is the view to the same potential variation district plan once other stages of the structure plan or other infrastructure assessments have been completed. And the reasons, in a nutshell, why this was set to district to manage growth is as follows. As Mr. Gopman has alerted us to, that the FDA process is time bound. We're looking at 5 to 10 years and some cases 10 years plus. With the funds being produced, we can have changes to live zone land for various different zone categories. These changes would be receptive to the market and driven up by demand in a much shorter space of time. The buzz would also ensure that the council is consistent with national planning standards, be consistent directed by the councils and with the government. The changes coming ahead. The changes would also be receptive to what would be short and introduced planning framework, and as endorsed by the councils, we can get this as a way forward to manage the growth of Timaru district. Infrastructure provision, take that chapter as read. As far as the supporting technical evidence, there's been a lot that we've got as an appendix here. I will summarise the engineering technical statements as.
I don't think you need to do that.
No?
We have
Okay.
read it.
Okay.
That's not really the point. What
Yep.
we're wanting to know is your planning opinion.
Yep.
In light of those additional matters
Yep.
that are appended to you, and simply just a summary. What is your planning opinion of the merits of the zoning changes being pursued by Warren and Liz Scott for FDA 3? That's really in a nutshell what we want.
Yeah, so we have at the beginning of the report, obviously, and I'm taking it as read, with the original submission, the really thought is to provide to seek a zone change with the future urban zone. We've obviously got the technical inputs and the experience, the inputs there. What I've got as far as putting this together and factoring this in is that there has been a lot of matters being raised by Mr. Bonus for Scott's, namely the relation to the DAP, the infrastructure constraints, the flood risk effects and traffic effects. We have the supporting evidence already attached here. So we've got the engineering, which Selwyn Chan will speak to as far as his evidence. We've got the conceptual outline development plan that's been also attached to the evidence. We have the transport assessment also been carried out. And also got the flood risk assessment that's been attached as well. Having said that, we've also, in light of what I've said in my evidence, we do recommend that the property economics report be peer reviewed, data being now reanalysed to ensure that there is.
Can I interrupt you? You are here and you've told us that you're a planning expert and you're adhering to the code of conduct for expert planning witnesses. What we want to know is what is your professional planning opinion on the merits of the rezoning changes requested by your client, the Scots, for FDA 3? What is your professional planning opinion, having taken into consideration the council's section 42A report and technical reports, and having read the technical memorandums that were provided by your client as part of the preliminary process, and Mr. Chang's evidence. What is your professional planning opinion?
So my professional opinion is I believe that the future urban zone is a pathway for this particular site as far as future proofing residential development for the site. And so the way we would have that as a fuzz, then have a change later on, obviously by virtue of another district plan change to allow for the general residential zone. I believe my professional opinion that this is the pathway on behalf of my client that we want to undertake.
Thank you. I'll see if there are any questions.
So I just have a couple of questions and I'll keep them really short. So just following on from that, that the future urban zone is absolutely, in your opinion, appropriate for the site. I still wanted to know for this site, does the MPS HPL raise any obstacles and barriers? But I think at the very beginning, you said that isn't something that you have considered and can give an opinion on at this point. So I want to confirm that.
Correct. It's just been a time constraint. And as I said before, out of all the things that we've thrown at all our, the submitters as far as the evidence, I'm not in a position to be able to provide any material consideration at this point.
Okay, and then my other very general question is, your evidence strongly promotes bringing forward this FDA, the Scots Farm FDA, and I wanted to know more generally, why would it be appropriate for this particular site to be brought forward as opposed to others?
I think it's just to do with the fact that the client would like to seek a change sooner than the others, just because of the positioning of where they are, and they want to be able to develop the land obviously more quickly than the time frame allows for already is with the FDA.
Thank
Madam Chair, could I just make a clarification on the HPL for this site?
Sure.
Mr. Bonus had already confirmed that HPL does not apply to the Scots site, so that's irrelevant.
So therefore the future urban zone poses no issues.
My understanding, in the context of the Scots site,
We just check in with Mr. Bonus if we've got that. Yeah. Okay, did you want to move to Mr. Chang's evidence? Thank you.
Morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Selwyn Chang. I've been working in my past 15 years in Timaru District Council as a drainage and water engineer. So I deal with a lot of asset management and infrastructure for the drainage and water unit. And I've worked almost 4 to 5 years in Davis Ogilvy as a principal civil engineer. So I'm quite confident on my evidence statement that I provided here. So the site is well positioned in relation to the existing public council infrastructure, namely water supply, wastewater, and roading. This network either have confirmed capacity or can be extended in a logical, efficient, and cost-effective manner. There are no unusual engineering constraints, even with the capacity issue that was highlighted by Kevin Camp. It can be mitigated through engineering, as I have provided in my evidence statement, and the servicing solution proposed and are consistent with the standard practice across the country. From the strategic infrastructure perspective, the rezoning provides much more certainty. It enables council to align infrastructure planning and funding with actual development demand through long-term plan. That is to highlight one of the issues when Kevin Camp highlighted the priority of the long-term plan. In my experience, this alignment is important. Without zoning clarity, council has to plan around assumptions. often leading to efficiencies, e.g., for example, undersized pipeline, delays or misallocated investment. In addition, where my land has alluded to, most of the infrastructure are designed for 100 years. So it is to avoid those renewals or upgrades that have been placed undersized that could undermine the requirement of the proposed site. This proposal is not just about enabling development, it is actively support better infrastructure outcomes and more resilient growth management more resilient to growth management. I'm happy to respond to any specific question if you have.
Okay. So my first question is about feasibility versus readiness, and you've talked in your evidence with the 3 waters infrastructure that it's upgrades that will be required and that you see them as being feasible. And then went on to note that the infrastructure will be partially developer funded. And so I wanted to just get a general understanding of those 2 together. So first, what type of upgrade is required at a high level? And then secondly, like, what is your understanding of how the cost will be apportioned?
So the key fundamental here is where the proposed site is. For example, wastewater, you have to go through a council network before you can go to the wastewater treatment plant. So there are a couple of engineering options. One, when it comes down to taking care of your own proposed site development, there's a option like a combined pump station, combined pump station that will collect all wastewater and discharge at an off-peak time on the council reticulation. So this option is an option that is only benefits more to the developer, and therefore there are not much funding constraint to council. However, in most of some, if council were to look at carbon, try to have a committee aligned with carbon zero, some government policies, and to upgrade the infrastructure, it comes intertwined because you want to avoid, because you have to include some of the growth. Where does growth come in? Is it infill, or is it just only do they cater for the peripheral of the growth development? You see what I mean? Yeah. So where the funding comes from is council has some mechanism in terms of financial contribution, or I'm not sure whether they go for a development contribution or some financial arrangement on it. But to build this financial contribution, council will do need certainty who is paying for this upgrade of the network. And therefore, the question comes down to this one: does this upgrade of the network only covers the current existing Geraldine boundary, or does it covers inclusion of the FDAs or FUZs allotment? So if it does cover FUZ, then there will be some certainty in terms of when it's going to come in, how is it going to be funded in part of the long-term plan. Where from my experience, long-term plan doesn't give that granular detail of where the growth funding is. It's just not to that detail. So therefore, it comes down to any property developers. They do not know when the upgrade is, and when council do the report of the capacity, there's always have capacity issues, but doesn't give much information when this capacity issue will be resolved. And therefore,
I do generally understand Timaru District Council and financial contributions that apply here. It's in your evidence and also Ms. Dolan's evidence, it specifically does talk about the contribution that the developer would make. And I wanted to understand more specifically if you've had those conversations, what it looks like, or if it was just a generic.
if it's extension, that's a small extension to the development, those are usually developers funded. If council wish to see, or they want to extend it further, there will be a proportionate arrangement how big their catchment they want, proportionate to Scots. If it's not only up to Scots, then the accession is usually they're funded for that.
So that's quite general.
Yeah.
So my other question is around stormwater management. And I know that it's in a flood assessment area and that it's been assessed as having a low risk, but it's still in that flood area. And there's been, albeit a long time ago, I think 1986 was showing the major flood event for the site. And I wanted to know how that would impact how flood is going to be managed in stormwater, given the Rokapuka stream nearby and the cultural values that are attached to that.
Usually this will be covered under, will be designed according to the Canterbury Land and Water Region Plan, which will be aligned, which will have a lot of consultation with ECAN on those criteria for it to meet the standards and quality limits of discharge based on the Canterbury Land and Water Region Plan.
Thank you, that's it.
That we also have to meet Canterbury Land.
I have no specific questions for you on your report, but thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Right, Mr. McLaughlin, do you want to just continue on to the next? Are you involved? Our next submitters, are you involved in that one?
Yeah, Lauren was going to
Okay, so do you want to swap out and then
swap out.
that'd be great. Thank you. We've got enough seats here for everybody. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I welcome Tim to introduce a submission in the site, and then I'll come back and.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Appreciate your time to hear us this morning in regards to the submission regarding Burke Street at Pleasant Point. The team alongside me here have been helping us work through the technical input to try and piece together the information that may or may not support matters in your opinion. And I just want to acknowledge the difficulty you all have in the changing RMA environment and some of the potential changes around development, our sequence development, and I suppose how that mass damming approach links in. So and obviously that's all set alongside the council and their wishes on a delivery of plan, but meeting the statutory requirements. So there's a whole bunch of considerations for you all to work through there. But I just wanted to just quickly give a why to what we're putting forward today, and then obviously you're probably more interested in the technical matters. But I was born and raised in Tokyo Valley and intermediate, and spent my primary and intermediate years at school and Point, and still have family links to the district. And one of the things I've noticed in recent years is people who I grew up knowing that were friends of my grandparents, have been left with no other option but to move to Timaru against their immediate wishes, but have ultimately had to accept that outcome due to limited options. My wife and I are shareholders and operators of two small rest homes in Timaru. One of the homes is a dementia unit situated in a rural setting, and we've seen the real positive impacts that kind of sense of space, trees, and access to animals in the wider environment can have on people's lives. We have a good relationship with our neighbours, who often, kids of our neighbours or just neighbours generally bringing food around and such like. So there seems to be a natural fit to what we do in the rural exec. You know, other considerations. Sorry, I was just going to touch on right at the beginning. We approached the community board at an early stage to kind of touch on the idea of what we were thinking about, and we gained a letter of support. And from that point, we've kind of got a bit more serious and slowly progressed through the district plan process to gather the necessary information to support our argument for a zoning change or some sort of future urban overlay. I guess there are benefits to the specific site, and you know, the positive impact of space that residents would receive in such a setting would be measurable. But there are other benefits as well, including just things like the proximity to domain to watch sport, proximity to the golf course, just the general contour of the site and proximity to other services in town, and possible opportunity for connections to be established with the school and general integration into the community. And I guess the other matter is our desire to continue to link the walkway on the margin of the watercourse that runs through the northern extent of our requested area for residential zoning to accommodate the built form. And there's a working group that have actually approached us expressing a desire to continue to link the pathway from, you know, where it currently terminates through to the domain. So, you know, in our minds, that seems to be a potential big one for environmental and social outcomes for the wider community. Other considerations around the HPL matters and, you know, just issues in general around the site's ability to be a productive farm. And I guess we've provided independent advice that supports that it's not. And equally, I understand that that's under the current settings, it's not necessarily can be a given, but yeah, I guess logic would say, at least in a practical sense, the site's not large enough to achieve economically viable outcome. And I guess further coupled with the fact that the site immediately to our west is possibly working towards becoming a residential site, there'd be further impact around reverse sensitivity. And I suppose I just wanted to touch on the other aspects of MPS HPL that, you know, the other provisions around social, environmental and economic outcomes that are available in that policy statement. But I guess just two or three more other key matters, proximity to Timaru being a key benefit. It's well positioned to support quite a setting, but sufficiently close to a tertiary hospital. The demographics show clearly at a wider district level, or specific demographics analysis around aged care show clearly at a wider district level. There's long-term demand for aged care development, which requires a different approach to ordinary assumptions. And I suppose it's important to note that McKinsey data isn't included in this analysis. So while it's possible development could occur in that district itself, I guess it's at least plausible to assume that even a small amount of additional demand may be generated from that direction. And we know at a national level there's some serious issues around underinvestment and additional aged residential care capacity, and even village developments now to a certain degree. So without significant investment in a short time frame, we'll be entering a period of haves and have-nots. And there is currently a review process before the select committee around aged residential care to try and solve some of these issues. So I guess that's all I wanted to say, and pass over.
Look, we might just take the opportunity to ask some questions. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Blacklow. We appreciate your personal touch to your submission. I have a series of questions, infrastructure as well as planning, so bear with me. Firstly, I just want to talk about the evidence, what evidence support. Sure, okay, sure. Right, I'm directing them at you, Mr. Blacklow. I changed this now. I've got to look at my questions. Give me 2 seconds. I think this one is good for you. What evidence supports your view that there is unmet demand for aged care or retirement village housing in Pleasant Point?
Well, I think you will have seen the Collier's analysis, which it has taken a wider district perspective, but I think it's reasonable to assume that at least a proportion of that demand profile would be generated, from an area that's proximal to Pleasant Point itself. But I suppose that the point of difference argument that I presented at the start, I think, would attract people from beyond that immediate kind of vicinity. I guess just to touch on that, an anecdotal level as well, we've often had a dementia unit at Timaru actually had people come from Pleasant Point because the district hasn't had enough capacity at the time.
More of a community one, and you did touch on that you have had some engagement with the Pleasant Point Community Board, and they have supported in writing your concept. But I wondered, is there any other wider engagement with the local community on your development beyond this mission from the district plan process?
Not in a formal capacity. There's certainly been plenty of casual conversations, but so that doesn't inform it. I suppose right at the outset we did engage with the sorry, forgive me, I forget it's the OCAR equivalent ACL that was right at the very beginning when we put our submission forward, but we haven't had any further engagement beyond that.
Thank you. What I'd like to understand, say, you're seeking the whole piece of, the land and this 6.4 hectares rezoning of the 10 hectares. What I just wanted to ask you was, is it critical that it's both the residential and the care home? Like, is it that they're inextricably linked? Because it's just there are a number of impediments around capacity considerations for residential land. What we heard in some questioning with Mr. Heath yesterday, and I'd be interested in your view, is actually the requirements to be able to provide aged care actually are quite different because they need different areas of land, different approaches. And I just wanted to understand from you first, and it's probably something to ask the others, and I know infrastructure and things are difficult on a piecemeal, but is it necessary to have all of it? Like, is the residential a key part for the care home in terms of funding or infrastructure? Or have you given any consideration to whether there could be some separation between the types of activities and some kind of a bespoke solution in relation to the care home?
Sorry, just to clarify your question there, are you trying to distinguish between the village aspect and the care facility aspect and the zoning relevant to them?
Sorry, you mean that, sorry, I was looking at any part that was just, so the village, so that might be a clarification, is the only residential development you're envisaging part of the care home village, and there's no other land, land that's just going to be normal residential?
Yeah.
Is it all part of the same facility? that could be my first question.
Yeah.
And that's quite a key piece of understanding I didn't have until now.
Yeah, sure. Our intention would be that it would be a retirement village arrangement, occupation, operating under occupational rights agreements. Just the same as any other village around the country.
Thank you. I guess it's one of those issues when what's sought is a general residential zone, isn't it, about what it provides. So that's great clarity. Thank you.
Just if I may add a comment to that, the general residential zone provides the best framework from a planning point of view for the proposed development to occur in that residential zone. There's no site-specific zoning for Lassal villages under the proposed plan.
I think that's really helpful to understand that context, that this parcel of land is absolutely intended for a retirement village concept, and it's not actually being proposed for something else, because the next, and your evidence hasn't suggested otherwise, so. But I'm trying to understand then, like, why this particular site, and given its proximity to the general residential zone already, its local roads, its community facilities. I just think, Mr. Blackler, with you having that experience in operating retirement villages, it would be really helpful to hear from you why that site might be particularly appropriate for the retirement village.
Well, I touched on it earlier a little bit, but just to kind of expand on that, I think one of the things that's lacking with our existing rural setting is that there is quite a large disconnect between where we're placed in township itself, whereas this site, we believe, has the best of both worlds in the sense that it's a greenfield space where we can set our intent clearly around achieving the objectives that we want to achieve around space and that kind of rural aspect. But at the same time, it's proximal to infrastructure. It's right there on the boundary. We've got sports fields, proximal. We're also proximal on the other side to the school. And also, I guess, the flat nature, the contour of the site leads itself to support, people of limited mobility. Because I understand from your perspective that there are other areas in Pleasant Point that are theoretically deemed for residential, but they're up on a hill and a steeper contour, and that probably creates some obstacles around delivering the best outcome in the context of what we're trying to deliver. Does that answer?
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Mr. Blacklow, just yesterday we heard from Mr. Heath, and following on from his capacity analysis, he made some comment about there not being any need for additional land generally for dwellings in Pleasant Point. And he was somewhat critical or dismissive of the extent of community facilities and services that are provided in commercial, I guess, provided in Pleasant Point. As a local, I just wondered, we have visited Pleasant Point and we will do so again as a site visit, but can you tell us in terms of the needs of a retirement village, whether or not Pleasant Point provides adequate commercial and community services to support that activity?
Well, again, if I kind of apply the context of the arrangements we operate under presently, I don't see any obstacles. Again, I just reiterate the proximity to tertiary level hospital care and the essentially a stone's throw away in Timaru, like in the North Otago context, the access is an hour or so each way. So that kind of upper level healthcare requirement is nearby. Yeah, there's a medical centre there. There's access to pharmacy. There's a butchery and a supermarket, which we'd have every intention of trying to support. So yeah, I don't see any specific obstacles to what we're trying to achieve. No.
Thank you. And my other question was, the pathway, I guess, whether there's a resource consent pathway under a rural zoning and what the impediments are. You mentioned that you do operate some facilities in a rural zone elsewhere. Have you explored a resource consent pathway within the rural zoning framework?
Yeah, just to provide context before I answer the specifics, the site, the current arrangement we operate under, the site's been there for about 30 years. So I guess the question is, or I guess just having provided that context, my question would be, some of the challenges that might need to be met maybe quite a lot more advanced than what they were back then. But my understanding is that there is a potential pathway through the resource consenting way, and if I recall correctly, the consideration around that needs to be given through zoning around growth doesn't apply through a resource consenting pathway. So in some respects, that would help to satisfy some of those challenges, but there are other aspects that my colleagues here might be happy to talk to that would present challenges from another angle.
So I guess just adding on from Tim's comments there, initial compliance that suggests that this land use would be a discretionary activity under the rural zone. And a lot of the supporting evidence that we've put forward in front of the panel would also be used to support that land use consent for the development. We're actively doing the prep work for that land use consent concurrently with this process, and we'll be proceeding with that regardless, but I know you can't consider that today.
No, that's helpful to understand. Look, we'll take our morning tea break just for 15 minutes, and then we'll return and we can deal with anything further you want to say, Ms. Workoff, and then your expert witnesses. Thank you. I'm sorry.
You can take it off me, fair enough.
Sure.
Ms. Roycroft.
Madam Chair, so if it's a benefit to the panel, I would just like to introduce myself formally because I haven't put any evidence in front of you. So thank you to give you the opportunity to understand my background. My name is Lauren Roycroft. I'm the Principal Surveyor at Ogilvy Aoraki. I have been involved in land development locally for around 20 years and have a keen interest in resource management planning and how it can best shape land development. I grew up in Pleasant Point and in fact still reside in the townships. I'm very familiar with the district, including the context of the site. Today I appear beside Tim Blackler, the owner of Turnberg Street, and with her from Tim. My involvement today is I'm not here for expert evidence, so much Glenn, and I won't elaborate on that any further, but do provide a lot of background context and can fill in the gaps, hopefully, as requested. In the context of this site, I think it is important, before I hand over to Sonia, just to recap some of the main aspects. The site is subject to HPL. We have provided additional evidence in regards to the requirement and the capacity under A. We've talked to other sites being available, both through our evidence and today, and have provided evidence in regards to the aggregate business report. The NPSUD, talks about a range of topology, at least sufficient demand, and we believe these are key considerations for the panel to consider as well. I will hand over to Sonia to give her summary and welcome any questions.
Madam Chair, for the submission, I will take a lot of that as read. There are obviously aspects that Mr. Bonus had raised in his 42A report. We have addressed those in the section 42 report deliberations from 13 through to 20. I'm now referred to some of the experts' input. We have the transport assessment, the flood risk assessment. Also have raised the aspect for NPS HPL. Also, we have provided an outline development plan. And just a bit of a context with why else our client is wanting to have the zone change, and this one in particular, like the other submissions, is also seeking a future urban zone. We believe that this, the change to eventually want to have a general residential zone, best serves the site as far as future proofing for the concept of the residential village concept. It's also provides policies, better aligns policy settings than that under the general rural zone. And for the client also going forward for anything that may need to have any changes there for the medium long term, we believe that the residential zone would obviously also best serve as far as the policy settings and the undertaking of that. For example, if there's any future resource consents that need to be applied for. As far as professional view, I still believe that the future urban zone is the way forward. We have provided all the expert evidence, and then also we also take the information as far as Pleasant Point in particular. There is the whole table that's been put together for the property economics report that also presents information on the capacity requirements, very similar again to the other submissions that we believe that also this needs to be reviews, and to ensure that there was sufficient capacity for Pleasant Point, for the future. Thank you.
Don, can I just ask you just about other alternative ways of providing for the activity that your client is wanting to establish? We heard just before the break that under the rural provisions that the retirement village concept care home would be a discretionary activity. Had you given any thought to whether or not a modification to the rural framework or policy setting in the rural zone immediately adjoining the urban area of Pleasant Point, so quite a bespoke provision that might better enable or support this activity?
Madam Chair, are you talking about the potential for a precinct overlay over the site with a general rural zone underlay?
I think probably all options are on the table at the moment. I'm not saying we have a view on what the most appropriate method that would require a Section 32 evaluation to determine that, but just in principle, whether or not there were any higher order policy impediments to that kind of approach.
So in the period of time that I've been had this along with the others, we did actually investigate it as a pathway. But all things considered, as far as the merits of, for example, a precinct overlay, all things considered and the intention of what the original submission set out, it would be best to go for a pathway of the future urban zone with a general residential zone change at a later date. It's just as far as the future proofing of the site, we felt that that would be better under those policy settings. The precinct idea would just be complex. Also, it's bringing something quite new to the table, quite different to perhaps what the intention of the original submission was. We just felt that and keeping it consistent with the other submissions as well, I think that that was the best way forward in that respect.
So you hadn't necessarily gone through the discipline of a sort of Section 32 evaluation of various options. You've just formed a general judgment on that?
Correct. I think it's just more in the light of the resource and time that we had, and to see what other councils have done to see how they've served their communities. We just thought, this is I think the way forward. Precinct idea or anything as an alternative would just be potentially messy. Also, it means that we had to bring up our own set of provisions for that site, and I know that has been done before for other sites like Waihi School, but we feel that this is definitely the best pathway.
And working back the other way, if we were persuaded that either the relief is that it should go to general residential, and that's big if, or some sort of future urban zone, some kind of mechanism that would limit development opportunities on the site to be confined to this particular activity. Have you given any thought to that?
If that means, say, sort of a site-specific set of provisions, absolutely, that could be something we could be open to. And I know that has been done previously with other councils. And yeah, I think we could be open to that.
Okay, I'll leave that there.
If I may, Madam Chair, can I just add some background context to the precinct? It was discussed originally with Matt Bonus and Ms. Ballard, and there was a scope consideration as well. I understand it as a mechanism that's put forward, and the reason why we have pushed for the general residential zoning instead was in light of that, and also the evidence for the general residential zoning.
I'd be interested to know what the scope issue is, because presumably it's still somewhere between the status quo and the relief that the SMIT is seeking. So I'm not sure, Ms. Wheeler, whether you can say that.
I mean, I recall that I was part of a meeting
with the submitters at some point many months ago. I don't recall a specific discussion as to scope, but I certainly haven't considered it in any detail. It may be that we mentioned that scope might need to be considered or something along those lines. I'm not sure, but I haven't looked at that detail at all.
As a general principle, if it is somewhere between the status quo and the relief the submitter seeking, there is a bit of wriggle room.
That's right. As a general principle, yes, I haven't delved into the specific submission recently. Yeah.
Thank you.
To clarify, that was with Ms Hamilton as well, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so no other specific questions for you. Thank you for your statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Hello again, Commissioners, Madam Chair. The site is also well positioned close to the existing infrastructure network, public network. Most of those capacity issues that was highlighted by Matt Ornish in his or Kevin Camp was that usually those can be resolved through a pump station or some form of means of regulating flow controls. Otherwise, it's all can be engineered to meet the capacity issues. Right. In terms of funding, it will be subject, it is only extending infrastructure to the proposed site only. This will be well funded by the developer. If council wish to have a community wider benefits, then it will be a proportionate subject to how in a reasonable and justifiable manner. Otherwise, it is the same concept that FUZ will provide clarity and certainty to councils and council officers, so that they can plan and invest the infrastructure fund in the long-term plan in the rightful manner. So this proposal is not just for enabling development, it also actively supports better infrastructure outcomes for council and more resilient to growth management. I'm happy to respond to any specific questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. I think you might have answered a couple of those, but just more around the infrastructure. Have you had any engagement with council infrastructure teams to verify that capacity exists or can be enabled?
Yes, I have discussed with Kevin Camp in terms of understanding what is the restriction of what is the source of under capacity of the network. So and also my past experience as an engineer in dredging water unit, so I do understand where the bottleneck in Pleasant Point network is. So such as water, which council has newly constructed a new reservoir and a water treatment plant to provide that. Also understanding what is the issue here is not the level of service of the drinking, the issue is the firefighting requirement to meet the firefighting requirements. So this understanding the source of the under capacity is where the engineering comes in to mitigate those. There's many options to mitigate that, whether it's a standalone developer, which they will pay for it, and we will just take it for its development site. If council wishes or we would like to improve it for wider benefit, that is a strategic booster pump could be put or in the water. So this will come down with a communication with councils, and hence, once we got this zone, it gives some certainty. A communication will be triggered with council officer to understand where council position is, where the council would like to take that as a wider benefit, or if not, developer will be solving his own problem, and therefore will be an engineered solution, particularly for the site only.
And I think you touched on this just briefly before, but what discussions have occurred with TDC regarding development contributions or infrastructure cost sharing for this development?
We have not discussed total robustly on financial contribution development contribution or something contribution similar, but it's a mechanism. If council have no funding is a mechanism to look at a wider picture, including including council network plus the development, if there's a wider benefit for upgrading certain type of pipe to allow infills and the development for it. The submitter is willing to pay the contribution, not against it. It's just a work that a mechanism that council can look forward to fund the work to fund the growth work. Thank you.
No further questions on infrastructure. Thank you very much. So back to you, Ms. Roycroft. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, we can move on to the next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of points to raise just from matters that came out of discussion yesterday. So Mr. Heath did comment on lifestyle villages in general. He also made the comment about the site in particular and the perceived flood risk. I third one, we had the opportunity to see if there's any further questions in light of our last evidence that was supplied in regards to our engagement with Canterbury Regional Council throughout this whole process and their feedback.
Sorry, my notes are so scribbled from the last few days. I did have a question that was raised yesterday around footpathing and that kind of development. So has an assessment been done on pedestrian and mobility scooter access, particularly given this is for an elderly demographic use?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Scott. In response to traffic, and in particular matters raised by Mr. Collins yesterday regarding the site in particular, we do know that the evidence provided by Mr. Carr in a summary report 3.8 clearly says the traffic effects on both the lifestyle village and the general residential zone. So the panel can take some certainty that the full development option, not that it's proposed, has been considered. We also note his comments in regards to a linkage to George Street and the footpaths. Those have been indicated on our outline development plan, and Mr. Carr has fully addressed them in his evidence.
So while you're here, I just want to take the opportunity to check whether we've been, whether in particular I've read your correspondence with ECAN rightly. And I think from where I think it's got to is in terms of the flooding matters, they think that it is a matter that could be addressed through specification of floor levels. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yeah, there's several mechanisms that are available. So Tim Wrightback originally, when he consulted with ECAN, asked for additional redundancy in the model, so that would allow for a situation where there's a build-up of gravel in the rivers should a weather event happen. We had the opportunity to raise the site, balancing that with obviously engineering provisions. We have the ability to raise floors, keeping in mind this is proposed for elderly residents, so there is a practical limit on that option. There's also we've just recently worked through this exercise on a neighbouring development, and it has gained Canterbury Regional Council consent. So we're actively monitoring groundwater on the site, so we have technical information available to work through that process. And we're open to engaging further with ECAN through detailed modelling if required.
And just finally, I just want to confirm, so the recent information that you were referring to was actually, that was stuff that was in your package?
Can you?
The recent, the information and the discussion around it with ECAN, that was in the package?
Yes, no, that's provided as, yeah, it's gone in as evidence. Yeah.
Just to close that loop, and because I haven't got it in front of me, Mr. Bonus, what's the council position in response to the flooding issue?
I've identified as an outstanding issue in terms of the application of objective NH 01. The recommended, so this is the paragraph 12.7.6 A hazards. And I've outlined the objective of the proposed plan. It's also amended in terms of recommendation from Mr. Willis. NH 01 says risk to human life and a significant risk to property, natural hazards avoided in high hazard areas that are outside of urban zoned areas. That was the bit, the urban zoned areas was the bit that was added by Mr. Wallace in his recommendation. I've obtained a copy of flood hazard assessment from Environment Canterbury personally as well, not a hydrology expert. I have put that assessment in there. Parts of the site, as I understand them, are high hazard under the definitions of the plan. And in my view, in terms of the rezoning matter for the panel to make a decision on, that still remains a hurdle.
Just in response to that, the areas identified as high hazard have been avoided for built form. And a lot of that can be used for stormwater management and other purposes.
Right, so yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and submission.
Thank you everyone for your time.
We move to North Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thanks again. We've got Jacob Brady from North Meadows. He will get him to speak and provide some client context and particularly local experience working in the industrial sector. I won't obviously go through the formalities again, but yeah, in terms of my involvement with the Washdyke area, I've been actively involved over the past decade and more, particularly around the Washdyke expansion zone, that had gone through early development planning, consenting, and strategy for that area. And so have kept a pretty close eye on and understand the issues. I think the one of the key points to make is, and it's a bit of a generic statement really in terms of growth for our district really starts with industrial and business. That part of the district plan needs to really enable, because without that, the other FDAs that we're talking about for residential, they don't really follow. So I couldn't really understate or overstate enough the importance of, in my opinion, of the industrial zoning and how much more that we might need than what is actually anticipated. In terms of this exact submission, Sonia can speak to it, but would just like to acknowledge and support the Section 42A recommendation that the existing consented site carry that underlying general industrial. That obviously makes sense. And I don't know whether it can be brought up or during the discussion, but even just the district planning map would be to provide that context of how the site sits relevant to the expansion zone to the south, and then the FDA. If it can't, you guys are probably reasonably familiar with.
Ask, do we have that ability? Sorry, do we have tech support to make that happen?
Is that able to be done, to have the planning map put up on the?
Join the meeting, share my screen.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Into that 1 minute.
We do have the technology.
Yeah. Effectively treat me like I'll speak. Just be on the screen, I'll get too far.
Thanks, Aaron.
The only reason I think is it helps with that contextual look at the environment and just really understanding the coordinated pattern of development, which is obviously relevant. I'll probably at this point just hand over to Jason, bearing in mind time and things, so he can give a good rundown, and then we can, I'm available for questions, and similar to other consents, happy to jump in, given that Sonia's come in.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name's Jason Murray. I've been with Thompson Construction for 15 years. 25 years total on land, civil and building development in the Timaru area. The North Meadows site is owned by Thompson Construction and Engineering. It was purchased in 2021, I guess with a very long-term view at the time, to secure future work for the company ultimately. There was a shift pretty shortly after that. We were looking to consolidate all of our existing business onto one site. We are a design build construction company and we fabricate our own steel and precast. We have a rather large footprint requirement. We looked at alternate sites, but there was nothing available at the time. We needed in the order of 6 to 10 hectares to accommodate the business activities. So we then sought the resource consent for the operation on the North Meadows site. Our experience there was similar to many that we've encountered over the period post-earthquake through till 2020, roughly, where there was a lot of inquiry coming to the Timaru district, but we simply weren't ready or had sufficient land zoned and available and with a servicing pathway to take advantage of those opportunities. That inquiry level has tailed off in I guess once we've got into the post-COVID honeymoon period. Once we got beyond that, with market conditions decreasing. But we have over, the 15 years of my involvement with the company, seen a pretty decent uptake in the available land. That continues. See, Monday this week, we had a further building or land use consent for a building for one of the sites here in Washtike issued, and that's another 1.8 hectares of site that's now taken up with the consented development. So while there's been surges over the last period, where there's been a peak of building activity at times, and then a slight drop, even in relatively tight economic conditions, we're still seeing inquiry, we're still seeing land being taken up. There has been a slight shift in Washtike, and potentially we can talk to the map to identify the areas, but there was a property zone industrial that had been in the same hands for 37 years. That's recently changed hands, which I think from our perspective, it just demonstrates how long it can take sometimes for market conditions, those sort of things to correct a shortage that may exist in available land. We construct predominantly through the Canterbury Bight, but down to Dunedin and northward as well. Through our touch points in the construction sector and our clients, we're seeing other districts continue to stay ahead of the curve with seeking to identify areas and satisfy the need almost before it arises, so that when those opportunities come along, they can capitalise on them. There was a 200 hectare development recently announced back in May down at Melbourne. And then there's a Southern Link development at Mooreskill, which is another 60 hectares that is going to come on stream. The 200 hectares with a projected $3 billion spend, that's a very long horizon line to spend that money. There's got to be a 50-year plus horizon that development's looking at, which our experience has been that the horizon line that Timaru has perhaps hasn't been long enough, and getting enough land available under a variety of ownership constraints to capitalise on those opportunities. The other thing that seems to be a common theme, in both Rolleston and also in those two developments is proximity to port, which is something that Timaru can offer in spades. The other developments, they're looking for modern rail links and other means of accessing port. But Timaru, from us as a construction company, but also as locals, having plenty of land available to market, and in our case, easy to service land, it helps keep the industry going, provides jobs and supports our port.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bray. That's a very helpful background in terms of the rationale for the submission. I do have a couple of questions for you. So in relation to the existing land use consents, so I understand that that area is around 14 hectares, and that area, there looks to be agreement between the Section 42A officer and your advisors and yourself around that area. The balance is 16 hectares in the supporting information. I do note that Mr. Bonas has said that it's 19.7 hectares. Is there a reason, are you able to talk to me about that potential discrepancy in the extent of the area?
So correct, with there's 14 hectares total, of which 10 hectares is owned by North Meadows, and that's our consented development that we're underway with. There's two 2-hectare properties on the corner of Meadows Road and Arangi Road, different ownership, and they had consents in place prior to us. Of this balanced land, we've got 15.7 hectares shown under 16.
Could you come and talk to the map? And
Yeah.
if possible, tech-wise, could we get the land parcels up on screen?
They are in the 10 hectares, which title hasn't issued yet. The rest of the boundaries are shown.
And that the 16, the balance that was talked about was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I have that map in front of me, but maybe Mr. Bonas, are you able to clarify how you arrived at 19.7?
Sure. So the submission's actually very broadly set. The submission covers the wastewater treatment plant as well, extends all the way down to there. So at my figure 40 probably carves it out reasonably well, that I set out, essentially starting at sort of 12H12. So looking at the submission in its broadest sense, I think it was something like 86 hectares. There was nothing in the submission package in terms of any material around that. The expert evidence from Mr. Kemp is that the wastewater treatment plant is covered by designation. It doesn't need its own. I quickly excluded that area to save everyone some time in a rather lengthy report. And then I've identified at figure 40 the remaining area of the submission, excluding that area designated within the wastewater treatment plant within the plan, which incorporates, and that's part of their submission area. So my red area is the residual of the submission relief, and it identifies, separates between the yellow area, which is hectares, and the remaining part of their submission relief. It's the first I've heard today that the submission that they're still seeking is actually only the 16 hectare bit and not everything else.
Yes. So, thank you. So figure 3, in one of the attachments does set out the 16 hectare area, but I take your point around clarifying the spatial extent, which we can do so. Thank you. So thank you. I think we've got to the bottom of that. That does seem clearer now to me. Mr. Bray, you mentioned that previously you had been looking around for other industrial land, and you mentioned that 6 to 10 hectares was kind of the range that you were looking at. And at that point, you were unable to find land at that scale, and so you sought resource consents. So with the balanced land that you're pursuing for industrial, is that still the case in terms of the size of land that you see as being sufficient? What exactly what is the functional need, I guess, of what your operational need of what you're looking for at this site?
For sure. So 6 to 10 years is us. We have experienced a range of inquiry for land area, and it's tended to be on a larger size, larger scale. So one that I can speak to recently was a 4 hectare area requirement for an industry. Another one quite recently, which hasn't come to fruition, but they were looking for upwards of 9 hectares. So a specific land parcel area probably isn't an intended requirement for us going forward, because there has been a slight shift with TDHL since the period of our initial sort of looking for land. TDHL having 12 hectares on the corner of Aorangi Road now. And then, like I say, the ownership shift of the 14 hectare parcel as well. So with that coming back on the stream. But it's for us primarily having an excess of supply available to overcome some of those ownership constraints that do come up.
Thank you. And yesterday we heard from Mr. Heath, and this might be something that Ms. Dolan wants to address when we get to her. He was, in terms of the submission and the claim that there was insufficient land of a sufficient scale, he pointed out that in his research he had there is provision for large industrial sites upwards of 9 hectares. He mentioned 13 hectares, 9 hectares, and half a dozen of smaller 2 hectare. So are you saying that in your need that those available sites are not sufficient elsewhere within the district?
I think that it's the duration and so yes, there are available sites, and we have ownership of some of those. I guess this is having a slightly further horizon line for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's all my questions of you, Mr. Bray. Thank you.
So further questions for Mr. Bray. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Page 7 of my statement evidence. I want to reiterate that we do support the rezoning of the part of 236 Meadows Road, which we've alluded to before, which is 40 hectares developed for consented industrial activities. We seek that the balanced part of the 236 Meadows Road be either rezoned general industrial zone or to be rezoned future urban zone, or and the pathway for that to be zoned for general industrial purposes at a later time. I also want to alert to the matters that have been raised by Mr. Bonus as far as constraints, two matters being the infrastructure revision and the NPS HPL. Selwyn Chang, my colleague, will speak to his evidence later on. As far as the NPS HPL, I note that the client's 16 hectare balance plot is a mix of cluster and free soils, and due to timing we're unable to revise any splitting assessments as far as the NPS HPL. I do note that the anointing 14 hectare consented activity had set aside the parcel through test of HBL. Wanted to also alert to the property economics report and modelling that as far as the availability of sites, that is to be able to carry for the sort of activity that a client is seeking. We do believe that the other sites are neither service nor don't really necessarily feasible to deliver in the short to medium term. I note also the amount of vacant land for a wash dike has been allocated at 76.2 hectares. With that analysis, it's really hard to quantify how this vacant land is measured. There's no methodology for quantifying metrics or whether the land demand is for the short, medium and long term. And then the other thing I've got to say is the benefits of the future urban zone for this allocation of this land can be subject to structure plan that can also incorporate further technical investigations. We understand that we may not get the general industrial zone for this balanced lands because of the matters that raised by Mr. Wyneth. However, we do think that the future urban zone would be a really good pathway as far as an alternative. The rationale behind the funds for industrial purposes can be driven by the need to unlock industrial capacity and meet the demand for industrial land should the district experience strong economic growth in the future. I do know other councils have done the same thing. They've actually allocated a future urban zone, such as Waipa Council, Waipa District Council, and that land has been rezoned for industrial land purposes at a later date. I won't speak too much about the infrastructure part because Mr. Chang will be speaking to that. But we do believe that as far as the pathway, that this will be suited for the site, namely because we've already had part of our submission supported by Mr. Bonus as far as the rezoning. So it's just looking at having the balanced land following a very similar pathway as far as the outcome for the client. Let Mr. Chang now speak to the infrastructure if there's any other questions from yourselves.
Thank you. The issues around the fuzz and the absence of the Section 32A has obviously been traversed this morning, so I won't ask any specific questions on those aspects. I am interested in terms of Mr. Bonus's recommendation. He does make it quite clear that the recommendation for the balanced land primarily turns on an inability to give effect to the NPS HPL. And secondly, the resultant oversupply of zone GIS land. So I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you in the absence of any technical evidence on NPS HPL and any expert evidence from economic appraisal or economic assessment, how you're able to arrive at your view that it's in line with the statutory framework. I guess that's where I'm going.
Absolutely. I understand. I think a lot to do with it is the fact that we've got the land that's been had the developed consented for industrial activities that obviously has a general rural zone, and the fact that it has been rezoned subsequently from the land use consent. I think it's just more that a nice tidy outcome would be to have the balanced land there for that purpose as well. And I understand that there is to, those two things to be overcome, infrastructure provision, which Selwyn Sham will speak to, and obviously those things can be addressed. But for the time, for in the essence of not having time, I was not able to bring that to the table for the MPs HPL.
Okay, thank you. One of the evidence areas that Mr. Bonus' section 42A report specifies is in terms of transport. Do we have any evidence available in the supporting package, or we don't have anyone appearing today in response to transport? Is that correct?
Yeah, you can talk to that.
I can probably answer that a little bit. So with the land use consent, there was a traffic impact assessment done for that site. And broadly speaking, there's upgrades required for Meadows Road that are already going to be to an industrial standard that were triggered as part of that consent. And then obviously with the expansion zone sitting to the south, that's already industrial in nature, and there will be upgrades over time that would occur. So the anticipated receiving environment would be at a level that would be receptive to the activity that's being sought.
Right, thank you. And so that traffic impact assessment was for the purpose of a land use consent, correct?
Yes.
So just so I'm clear, we don't have any transport evidence relating to the submission request today.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And your point in terms of the property economic stuff, if I just make a little bit of put a bit of context around that, because some of that discussion happened before Sonia's time. Some of the points that we raised and tried to get across in terms of the local context, and in particular Washington, with South Canterbury being a food basket primary production area, the support for that rural sector and what's played out over the last 10 years has been the large footprint industrial sites. One of our concerns with the lens that property economics are looking through is that employment to floor ratio as a measure for looking at demand. And a lot of these large footprint buildings, in terms of direct jobs associated with that site, might be quite small. Arguably, they actually support wider than that when it comes to the rural sector. You might get additional truck drivers, you might get people working on farms. But in terms of employment associated with the individual sites, it can actually be quite low. And so that's one aspect. The other is that availability of land. And that's something that we still have a concern about in the Timaru context, because zone land doesn't equal available land. And for what I mean by that is that it can be strategically held by individuals or entities that have their own growth expansion needs that aren't known to the community. Examples might be McCain's, DB Breweries. The way I understand it is that the only sites that have been taken out of the available capacity were Fonterra and maybe the Periora Meatworks. And so property economics still considers that those other sites should be in the mix. But quite clearly what we've seen over the last 20 odd years is that they're not available. And so I think that it is a relevant consideration that I can't speak to it as an economist, but fundamentally it's there, it's obvious.
Thank you. That's helpful background. Appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Dolan, another question for you around the submission as thought also requested the application, the extension of the height-specific control area. So
Is that when the advanced report in February? Right, when the Commissioner?
I think it was, and I think that we highlighted that just as a potential anomaly. Like, why did it actually exist? And And we're really wanting to point out that was it necessarily in the context of the industrial environment. And I think because it stemmed from the airport, didn't it?
I've got a note here that the original submission sought to extend the SCA, the special control area, to the northern boundary, including the neighbouring land south, so as to enable built form to permitted height of 35 metres rather than 15 metres height on the remainder of the GIZ. And Mr Bonis, I believe, has recommended that be rejected, not be supported. So I was interested in whether you're still pursuing that or whether you are accepting Mr Bonis's recommendation.
Yeah. Probably just let it ride with.
Yep.
Good. Thank you. And my only other question related to, and you may have already mentioned this in your introduction, so apologies if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. In terms of the merits of, or whether you have sought, whether you're pursuing any alternative consenting process for the balanced land.
Rather at this stage, yeah, the immediate need was that 10 hectares that's been obtained. It's really more a case that when you take a step back and you look at the framework and coordinated pattern of development, that it just made sense for us to take the opportunity in the forum to ask the question. That's the reason we're here.
Okay, thank you. No further questions on Ms Dolan from me. Thank you.
There's no further planning questions, but thank you. So, Mr Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and the Commissioners. For the proposed site in Meadows Road, there is a water and sewer, low pressure sewer has been installed recently this year in the extension of Linden Street to along Arangi Road. Most of these extensions are developer funded, majority of that extensions. So there's no issue for that to be further extend towards that. The only restriction was because it's a rural urban zone. It requires approval from council to have some connections out of zone services. So there are a couple of lot size, including Thompson's 10 hectare, have been discrete rural zone, but now it's connected to the urban services. It's just to ease that plan. In addition, there's the wastewater, Timaru wastewater treatment plant is very close by. The council is considering whether they do need to extend a trade waste line. That was the intention for the washback industrial expansion zone to cater for wet industries. So to supplement and comment about Tiff's on 10 hectares where the big hectares is subject to where the location of this hectare. Usually wet industry does take a lot of area, and if there's a trade waste line that's been considered and funded by council through financial contribution, that proposed site could be opportunity for wet industry and allow for that big land. So if you have a big land but no trade waste line, it become a big storage yard or something similar. While this land is located so close to wastewater treatment, the trade waste, this could enable some cost effective on between water industrial expansion zone and the proposed site to have a reasonable low cost sharing due to a bigger number of contributors. In terms of stormwater management, the lot 10 hectare has already received a resource consent from ECAN for discharges to the ground and to the nearby flood protection drain. It will be a similar approach for the remaining site to obtain ECAN consent, and a similar approach of consultation and process. So overall, most of those are developer funded, except for trade waste, because trade waste will be more like a public-wide benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. So we did hear from Mr. Kemp yesterday, and he provided an updated appraisal, if you like, in response to submitted evidence. And he hadn't reached a different opinion based on the assessments that you had provided. So it would be helpful for me if you were able to succinctly summarise the key difference between the key area of disagreement as it stands currently.
I'm not sure where his big lot size are he just said a number, there's the number here, but I'm not sure where is it. It could be the one that is on the west side of Timaru. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's the west side of Timaru after the railway. What I'm saying is because of the location where the water treatment plant is, there is currently the zone that is not identified as an industrial deferred zone in the district plan. That proposed site that we are submitted has is also could be a valid area to allow industrial, a general future urban zone or a general industrial zone.
You're referring to the economy of scale.
Yes, that's right. So in terms of, my question related to Mr. Kemp in terms of the servicing.
Yep.
Yeah. So any kind of outstanding area of disagreement in terms of servicing. Yeah. Thank you. In response to the evidence that you've provided to us in the submitter package, what is the pressing issue that we need to consider?
There is no pressing issues, and the only pressing issue is if there was to currently it's rural zone, so that rural zone, so any connection to be serviced for that rural zone will require council's authority. Where I can see the benefit is the councils to consider a tradeways line. That could be an economy of scale to include due to the site location for it here.
As a wee bit more context, and maybe to help round it out, one of the issues when you're in someone like Kevin's position, needing to look at it is it's not zoned. Therefore, looking at the LTP funding and then how it might be planned sequence just gets ignored because it's hypothetical, can't be considered. And I think that's really where the suggestion of an FUZ or similar mechanism provides that clarity, certainty, and with guardrails to allow for it to be more robustly thought of in infrastructure planning going forward. And then if you're looking at the context of where it sits, even relevant to sequencing and the potential for, is it FDA? I can't see, is it FDA 13? I can't. Yeah, if you're looking at how that might be potentially serviced in the future, Aorangi Road is a reasonable corridor to anticipate that trunk infrastructure might come down that path. And so rather than having development on only one side of the road, this provides an economy of scale that brings financial contributions potentially down, is what Selwyn was alluding to earlier.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. That's a very helpful addition. Thank you. No further questions from me.
No further questions on that submitter. Thank you very much for that. And we'll move to your next submitter. Westcraft and Gibson.
If you don't mind, could we, the Westcast aren't appearing in person and we've got Mr. Aiken here.
Absolutely. I can swap them around.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually thought it was the other way around anyway.
The campus.
Yeah. Oh, no, Aiken. Thanks for accommodating that. Thanks, Madam Chair and panel. Okay, I'll jump straight into the relief sought and then introduce Ms. Aiken, who will speak from a landowner's perspective and also someone that's very involved with the community, both Timaru and in particular Tamaka. Overall, obviously, we were seeking to retain EPA 6, but really looking at removing the timeframe associated with that and the implementation of the FDA. The alternative relief was to amend its timing from 10 years to 5, and then grant any consequential relief as necessary, which the shift now might include consideration of the future urban zone with appropriate triggers. Yes, I'll probably at this point, I'll just let Gutsy take the floor and see if I can go back and like we have on others.
Thank you for saying, team. My name's Gary Aiken, second generation businessman in Tamaka since 1967. Proudly wear the black and white socks and we are very proud of our region. Just reiterating that we employ, just in Timaru alone, 180 staff. We're the largest contractor to Fonterra, being the New Zealand's largest supplier of ingredients, I suppose, with 1,000 employees. So we have a very good relationship with the culture of Timaru, the business culture, but also of the wider South Canterbury region. What we've done is analysed that a lot of our staff, and no different to the transportation and logistics sector, we're going through an economic time where we've got to sit down and make sure we're sustainable in our pattern. But what we're doing is we're finding we've actually got a further attraction of employees coming to us, so travelling further, e.g. from Ashburton. We've got a couple of employees from Waimate, and we've actually got substantial employees from Jewellery and Pleasant Lake and Timaru. What we're after just analysing some of our local staff members, Timaru's not offering them what they need, and it's not a high-end market. It's probably the lower end housing that they can come into, and affordable 3-bedroom home with families to set up an environment and a culture. We are multicultural. We've got Arapanoa and Marae right on our back doorstep, and we work very, very closely with those guys. The substantial investment we want to throw at our town in the next probably 10 to 15 years is backed not only by iwi and ourselves, but a greater portion of investors in that region. So we're proud of what we've got. What I'm trying to say is we've got no different to other submissions that have come through here, just make sure that we've actually got the ground to do it. And we're not asking for a tick box today. We're sitting here saying, how do we actually create a pathway to make sure that we're actually recognised, and when it does come time to expand, that we can actually do it in a less complicated manner. And we call partnerships is like our middle name, and that's what we want with TDC and our consenting process. I've just been through a large consent process with ECAN, with a business of ours, Canterbury Environmental Solutions, and we've sourced to work with and against. And there's two different pathways. You can sit down and you can have consultants trying to take each other's heads off and be one better than each other. But we found that actually by bringing the teams together and working together gives you a hell of a lot more strength to deliver what the outcome needs to be. And the pathway we've recognised through that is no different to what we're sitting here today. It's about working together as a team. So it's not about it's about what we can, we've got a parcel of land. The old fellow's 90. He's not going to live forever and a day. God, I hope that's not what I think. It probably is. But we've got to secure his future and just make sure that his foresight is actually recognised later on through our generations as well. Thanks, Tim.
Ben? Thank you, Ms. Given. A couple of questions here. With regards to class 2 soils, can you elaborate on why the site's productive value is constrained to the point that urban development is a better use? Is that not for you? I thought you know your land.
Class 2 soils?
Then why aren't you farming it? Why is it not a productive piece of land for farming purposes or anything? Why do you think that this piece of land can only be?
Predominantly towns grow to the north, and even though Timaru is built on swamp, it's still probably the best part of the land. Like if you go further east towards the coast, you're definitely wearing gumboots. And even to go to the west to the Waitui area, you've got clay-based soils, which does not release the moisture as well. So there's a combination of just trying to pick the right spot. And I think with the trend where we've got a high school as a boundary, we've got access up to principal roads being 7th Street and Factory Road. We see it as an opportunity, but I'm quite keen for these questions because it's healthy to actually understand a different perspective on it.
And that's good. And we plan to do a site visit to familiarise ourselves. So that will be great. Just one further question. Do you anticipate any staging of infrastructure rollout to match development uptake? Because obviously that's a big part of this property economic report saying there's sufficient amounts. But with this particular development, do you see it as a staged approach, or do you think, roll out with market demand, or do you see get in there?
I'd probably see it as a staged. Yeah, I actually see supply and demand is always going to be met. There's no sense oversupplying because all you're doing is you've got a dormant, it's no different to our main street with empty shops. You need to make sure that you've got a balanced approach. I think it'd be more staged.
Because I suppose that just supports your request for moving it from that 10-year plus down to 5 to 10 years. That's significant, and it's, are you ready to roll this out and meet the demands of the market? And I suppose that's my question around that change that you're looking for.
It's interesting. That's a good question because 5 years is what a lot of our business leaders around Timaru have actually sat around the table and identified as that's the point of change when Timaru needs to change. And that's not only for the investment in this block of land, this is actually their main street. And the only way we can actually make Timaru sustainable is by having families. Basically, we've got to have personnel to come up our main street and to fill some of those empty shops and actually rework our town. And this is not about I, this is about we as a community. So that's what I'm looking at.
If I could add to that, Stacey, that's the whole sort of rationale in a way about the future urban zone and or just the request initially to get rid of the 10 years was why have that block there if there's someone that's willing to work with council. And we're totally cognizant of the fact that there's still other matters too, like sequencing and infrastructure, but those things can be embedded in the requirements to overcome before that step. But it's really about we're going through this process of the district planning review, and it's an expensive exercise that takes years. District plans don't react well to demand when it's needed. So what can we put in place? So we're not necessarily asking for zoning straight away, but we've listened and we're trying to find a happy medium.
Thank you. Next, Mr. On you. Next on list.
Yeah, I'll bring in some fresh evidence here. Just wanted to the panel to, to echo, Mr. McLaughlin, and my client, that out of for the property economics report, interesting enough, Mr. Heath has actually identified as Timaru being, deficient, in the capacity, residential capacity. So heavily reliant on FTA. However, we don't have FTA allocated. There will be actually, this is the basis of the average of the 450 square metres in that table. It actually will be under, says -64 as far as the capacity. And obviously, I'm assuming that this FTAs will mean that that land will be unlocked and then changed, rezones over time. So it doesn't speak to timing and sequencing of when that will occur. The other matters that Ms. Wallace raised in the report, we obviously have spoken to, attach those in the evidence, the infrastructure, geotechnical report, outline, development plan, transport assessment will be, Mr. Chang will bring his evidence in. And obviously, we do acknowledge, the NP's HPL matters. We understand that that is something, we've attached obviously from the agribusiness report assessment, that has, fleshed that out as far as, we do say that, we can overcome the, particulars of the HPL. But as far as this site, view, that's the fuzz, would be the way forward, and a lot to do with it is we've talked about is just about having the ability to then rezone the land and not be constrained by a time frame as we already have with the FTA. If there's anything else, but I wanted to make sure I wanted to reinvent the wheel and repeat myself.
Fine, thank you.
Sorry, just let me reread them. Following on from what you've just sort of read to us, that you've proposed a future urban zone with structural planning to follow. Without current LTP funding for infrastructure, how can we be assured development would be timely and not speculative?
I'm just thinking, Mr. Shane can probably speak to that a bit further.
We did have a meeting with councils many months ago. Council has carried out their model, WSP model, Timaru and Timaru growth capacity assessment. It did identify those areas, particularly Temuka, that no future growth can occur, particularly FTA 6, until upgrades has commenced. So it is, we did talk to Andrew Lester and Kevin Cam in terms of when is this upgrade occur. They did not give us the granular detail in terms of when. They told us this LTP is not funded. So that means what I mean is we do need to have a communication with councils to ensure certainty for it. If this is not zoned, it's pretty much unlikely the council will just ignore, more like ignore this is FTA, will not invest any infrastructure there, and then those upgrades that's identified in the WSP report that council has undertaken may be undersized or may not, may misallocate the fund in an appropriate area. So what it triggers is certainty for council. To answer your question, is to have more communication to ensure that there's a zone that is going to be a future urban zone, ensuring councils may have time, which is I agree on staging methods to renew those identified types that's identified by WSP report to upgrade at a appropriate size to cater for that future, to cater for that number of future urban zone area. Oh, sorry, Stacey. So that means if that is to progress, so that means it could allow council to have a to create a structural funding or financial contribution to cover those growth upgrades requirement.
Thank you. I've just got one question, and it's possibly one actually that Mr. McLaughlin might need to answer, but you may know. It's just in the attached documents, that agribusiness report. I'd just like to know who wrote it. And the reason I'm asking is that it is a generic report from agribusiness, and then it uses the terms I within the report. So I'd just like to know, and the same question is going to arise for the next submitter. I'd just like to know who was the author. That's all.
I believe Anne Moriarty.
Yeah, and it's overseen by Stuart Ford.
Yeah, overseen by Stuart Ford, written by Anne Moriarty. We can come back to you to confirm that 100%, but that's our understanding.
It would be useful if you could do that and we'll have it in writing. Thanks. Other planning questions. So was there anything else, Mr. Chang, that you wanted to add from your report?
Not much from my report. I think I answered the one that says it's a
Yeah, and I think you answered it, but I'll just because I wrote it down, I'm going to ask you. So it was around some of the modelling reports that came in, and I just wondered, has any modelling or preliminary design been done to confirm whether the proposed stormwater management system can meet TDC or ECAN flood level requirements? Because there was a lot about the the flood levels on the site. So I just wondered if anything's been done.
No modeling has been done. It's more on the surface, looking at the contour of the area. So that's where the low-lying area and where's the close by stream that can be discharged. So in the FDAs, I think we provide the outline development plan, where the stormwater management area will be likely to be addressed. We have provided a quite significant portion of land to allow attenuation and treatment to make sure there is quite a commitment of land that could meet the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan requirement. So all design will still meet the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan, so that it can align with the council's stormwater management plan, Timaru Council stormwater management plan when that has been approved for that year.
Thank you. And so there's no further questions in relation to that submitted package. So thank you very much for your evidence.
So, thank you.
Good.
Thank you, team.
So do we want to deal with the Westgrove Gibson submission? Yeah. Thank you.
Madam Chair and panel again. Right, moving to Garth Gibson with a 227, which relates to FTA 1 and 4. Currently, general rural zone and FTA overlay. The policy was that we immediate rezoning of the southern portion of FTA 1 to general residential, but now considering FUZ and the FTA boundary alignment and bringing FTA 4 forward within the timeframe. So today I'm representing Rosa Westgate and Gibson, the landowners at 82 Lennons Hill Road. Through successive family ownership, they've owned and farmed the property for more than 130 years. While they're farmers and not developers, they're committed to seeing the site used efficiently and responsibly for residential development that aligns with both community needs and smart infrastructure planning. through some of my notes because they're a little bit generic and we've covered some of those. Probably some of the key points to emphasise. The site has already been recognised for growth. It's been identified through the FDA 1 and 4 overlays and past council strategies to GMS 2022. It's adjacent to the existing urban environment and has proximity to services and roads, with a caveat there on services that the way the gravity falls is doesn't need that neighbouring site on the downhill side to help work. The boundary realignment with the FDAs was logical, and that's been supported, and we're thankful and agree with that. However, we do still request that that there's consideration on that on the FDA framework. Council have already initiated that development area planning process, and that's partly due to the presentation of all these sites. So there's FDA 1, 2 and 4. So in a sense, the development or the DAP is already partly there in meeting that immediate zoning consideration. I will acknowledge that that's pretty fresh and still hasn't gone through stakeholder engagement, and that includes landowner and other stakeholders. But it is there and it was provided as supporting evidence. Yeah, similar to the others, we commented on the property economics, and I would make mention, because we haven't actually touched on it previously, that it was only yesterday when Mr. Heath clarified about that average consideration, and so a lot of our evidence up to that point was on the assumption that he had used 450 across the board. However, as Sonia had alluded to earlier, I don't think he actually clarified the FDA element in terms of what he acknowledged what the existing urban assessment was, but the FDA element was different. And I think what actually came out of looking at a wee bit of the DAP information is the challenging nature of some of the area, like the topography and actually being able to achieve the yield. And I think, well, to me, that actually just highlights why this theoretical supply or capacity